The Middle Ages were not just a time of kings, castles, and crusades. They were also an age of deep superstition, where everyday life was ruled by strange beliefs and eerie customs. In a world without modern science, the line between truth and magic was blurred, and survival often meant keeping the spirits, demons, and curses at bay. This is the shadowy realm of medieval superstition. In the medieval imagination, cats weren't just mousers, they were creatures of mystery, feared for their supposed supernatural powers. Many believed a cat could sit on a sleeping person's chest and steal their breath, leading to illness or even death. This likely came from observing cats curling up for warmth. But in a world where nighttime suffocation was poorly understood, felines became easy scapegoats. It sounds grim, but some medieval folks swore by it. Rub a wart with the hand of an executed criminal, and it would vanish. The belief was rooted in the idea that death could absorb disease, transferring it away from the living. Graveyards and gallows became unlikely sources of folk medicine. While modern bouquets are about beauty and fragrance, medieval brides often carried garlic among the flowers. Not for flavour, but for protection. Garlic was believed to ward off evil spirits and jealous curses that might sabotage a marriage before it even began. A cheerful tune indoors might seem harmless, but in many medieval households, it was a dangerous act. People believed whistling inside called the devil into the home. The superstition may have stemmed from fears of summoning spirits, or from a practical belief that whistling was a sign of idleness, frowned upon in strict households. In some parts of Europe, women accused of witchcraft could be punished with a horrifying device: the witch's bridle, or scold's bridle. This iron mask, often fitted with a gag, prevented the wearer from speaking. It was believed to stop witches from casting spells, but in truth, it was a brutal tool of humiliation. In some towns, villagers would rush to light their fires on New Year's morning. The first smoke seen curling from a chimney was said to bring luck for the year ahead. Neighbours might even compete for the honour, believing it meant prosperity and protection. When building a house, some families would place a single worn shoe inside a wall, chimney, or under the floorboards. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was a deliberate charm, meant to trap or confuse evil spirits trying to enter the home. While game was a valued food source, some communities avoided hare meat entirely. It was linked in folklore to infertility, and eating it was thought to weaken a man's virility or a woman's ability to bear children. A sudden sneeze during a meal wasn't just a health concern. It was seen as a dark omen. Some believed it meant the devil was standing nearby, watching. Blessings after sneezes weren't just polite, they were protective spells. Pieces of rope used to hang a criminal were treasured by some as good luck charms. People carried small lengths in their pockets, believing they brought fortune and gambling, warded off sickness, or protected against the evil eye. To live in the Middle Ages was to live with one foot in reality, and the other in a world of spirits, curses, and unseen forces. Welcome to the towering walls and hidden chambers of the medieval castle. Beyond the battlements and beneath the banners, castle life was far more complex. This is castle life, behind the walls. Amid the stone and steel, every great castle had a patch of life, an internal garden. These green sanctuaries were more than decoration. They grew herbs for healing, roots for cooking, and flowers for fragrance. Some gardens were sacred spaces for quiet prayer, others private retreats for the noble ladies who ruled the domestic heart of the castle. Every well-fortified castle needed something far more important than just soldiers: a fresh water supply. Many castles had wells dug deep into the bedrock, sometimes located right in the centre of the courtyard. This wasn't just for convenience, it was survival. During a siege, access to clean water meant the difference between holding out and surrendering. Some castles even built secret tunnels to outside springs, protected by layers of stone and guards sworn to silence. The effort put into protecting water sources shows just how essential and vulnerable daily life inside the walls could be. Castles had toilets, called guardrobes, that projected from the walls above the moat or waste pit. These stone cubicles might seem primitive by today's standards, but they were clever. Waste dropped away from the castle, and sometimes herbs were hung inside to mask the stench. Still, they were cold, drafty, and hardly private. Often dismissed as mere attendants, ladies-in-waiting were highly educated women. They spoke multiple languages, managed correspondence, hosted guests, and helped organise everything from clothing to court ceremonies. Many were born of noble blood themselves, and sometimes wielded great influence behind the scenes. Falconry wasn't just a hobby, it was a status symbol. Castles had entire towers or enclosed areas dedicated to these majestic birds. Hawks, falcons, and eagles were trained for the hunt. A nobleman might be judged not just by his estate, but by the beauty and obedience of his bird. While knights fought with steel, castles fought pests with fur and feathers. Cats roamed the corridors, while owls nested high in the rafters. Together, they formed a living defence against rats and mice that could ruin grain supplies or spread disease. After a feast, you might think the food went to the poor immediately, but not quite. Noble households would often wait 3 days before distributing leftovers, believing this helped avoid waste. By then the food was stale, but for the peasantry it was better than nothing. Castle life was scheduled down to the hour. Servants woke before sunrise and were fined for being even minutes late. Duties included tending fires, preparing meals, managing supplies, and cleaning rooms, all under the strict eye of a steward or chamberlain. Before the printing press, scribes were essential. Castles often employed full-time scribes to copy legal texts, religious works, letters, and land deeds. Each document was written with painstaking care, quill in hand, candlelight flickering, mistakes erased with a sharp knife or a dab of pumice. Within many castles was a private chapel, and within those chapels, sacred relics. Bones of saints, pieces of holy cloth, even supposed fragments of the true cross were kept in ornate reliquaries. These items were believed to bring divine protection to the castle and its lords. A weird, fermented, and sometimes horrifying world of medieval cuisine, where spoiled food didn't just fill stomachs, it saved lives. Imagine vats of fish guts baking in the sun for weeks. That was garum, a salty, fermented fish sauce passed down from Roman times and still used in parts of medieval Europe. It reeked like death but added flavour and essential nutrients. Peasants, monks, even nobles poured it over meat, bread, and vegetables. It stank, but it stayed edible. Water could kill you. So people turned to ale, weak, warm, cloudy, and constantly bubbling. This was small beer, made from fermented barley. It wasn't refreshing, but it was safer than water. It fueled armies, fed children, and carried just enough alcohol to keep illness at bay. Cheese was never just cheese. Some varieties, especially in rural areas, were deliberately left to rot until they wriggled with life. Maggots helped break down fats, giving the cheese a soft, creamy texture. Disgusting? Maybe. But in an age without fridges, it was prized. Boiled eggs soaked in beer, and herbs lasted weeks, even months. The pickling brine fermented into a vinegar-like sludge, which preserved the eggs and added a sharp bite. Soldiers carried them, tavern-goers loved them, and the funk was just part of the package. Fresh milk spoiled fast, so they used it sour. Mixed with oats, barley, or rye, it became porridge. Add onions, herbs, maybe a scrap of bacon, and you had a meal. Children were raised on it. The sick survived on it. It was stomach-churning, but nourishing. Herring was shipped by the barrel across Europe. Salted, dried, and left to ferment, it arrived sticky, grey, and pungent. But it lasted through winter, Lent, and famine. The smell might have cleared a room, but it fed millions. Poor harvest? Eat what you can. Sometimes that meant mouldy rye bread, but one mould, Claviceps purpurea, caused ergot poisoning. Vomiting, burning limbs, convulsions and visions. Entire villages were struck. People thought they were cursed. In truth, they were poisoned by rot they couldn't see. Rotten apples, pears or berries were mashed and left to ferment into vinegar. Mixed with herbs and honey, it became a drink to restore strength, settle stomachs, and even fight plague. Sour, sharp and mouth-puckering. It was both medicine and refreshment. Before probiotics had a name, people drank the cloudy, sour water from pickled cabbage jars. It kept digestion going during lean months and offered rare vitamins in winter. It was essentially medieval sauerkraut juice. And yes, it smelled like death. Soft cheeses washed in ale or cider developed a wet rind that oozed and stank. One ancestor of today's stinking bishop was so foul-smelling it was banned from some churches, but it packed fat, protein, and salt into a transportable, long-lasting, nose-wilting bundle of survival. These foods may have smelled like death, but without them, many wouldn't have lived at all. Lemons were rare, expensive, and suspicious. Their acidity was thought to sour the blood and rot the stomach. Doctors warned they disrupted digestion and unbalanced the humours. While sometimes used in medicine, most avoided them in daily meals. Late to Europe, tomatoes were seen as dangerous. Their resemblance to deadly nightshade and their reaction with pewter plates caused real poisonings. Nicknamed devil's apples, they were blamed for illness, lust, and even death. Known as mad apples, eggplants were believed to cause insanity, leprosy, or demonic possession. Their bitter taste and dark colour made them suspicious, and some thought they stirred lust or mental instability. Garlic protected against evil, but it was also feared. Its strong scent and fiery nature were said to excite passions, overheat the blood, and disrupt spiritual purity. Monks often avoided it completely. Mushrooms were a deadly gamble. Edible and poisonous varieties looked alike, and without modern science, many feared them. Folk tales claimed they were food for witches or traps set by fairies. Fava beans killed some people without warning, a result of G6PD deficiency, unknown at the time. The cause was mysterious, so many blamed curses, sin, or divine wrath. Some monasteries banned them entirely. While cooked onions were common, raw ones were feared. Believed to inflame the spleen, rot the gut, and cloud the mind, they were often seen as disruptive to both health and behaviour. Leeks were avoided in religious life due to their link with passion and lust. Their strong scent and flavour were thought to inflame the blood, stir desire, and shame the soul. Used in cooking and medicine, caraway seeds were feared in excess. Said to cause strange dreams, madness, or sleep disturbances, they were also tied to spells, control, and enchantment. Parsnips were humble, but suspicious. Thought to be cold and moist, they were blamed for weakening the body, causing wind and disturbing the humours. Nobles often avoided them for being too rustic and rot-inducing. These once cursed ingredients are reminders of how strange and dangerous the kitchen used to be. The longsword wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of knighthood and chivalry. But make no mistake, it was a killer. Typically weighing 2.5 to 4 pounds, with a blade up to 47 inches, it was deadly in both slashing and thrusting. Knights trained with longswords using manuals like the Fechtbuch, which included detailed kill techniques. Well-trained knights could pierce mail and even exploit gaps in plate armour. And with 2 hands on the hilt, the power behind each swing was terrifying. At over 6 feet tall, the English longbow was the sniper rifle of the medieval battlefield. It could fire arrows over 250 yards, and with enough force to penetrate armour at close range. Skilled archers could shoot 10 to 12 arrows per minute. At the Battle of Agincourt, English archers devastated the French, whose knights were bogged down in mud and cut down by volleys of arrows. the bow required years of training. Once plate armour became common, swords weren't always enough. Enter the warhammer, small, brutal, and perfect for cracking armour like an eggshell. One side featured a blunt hammerhead, the other a spike or beak to pierce helmets. It was designed not to cut, but to crush and puncture. In close combat, knights feared warhammers more than swords. The shock force alone could cause massive internal damage, even without breaking the skin. Easy to use, hard to stop, a peasant with a crossbow could kill a knight. Crossbows could fire bolts at 300 plus feet per second, with enough force to pierce chainmail and even plate. Unlike the longbow, it required minimal training. Point, aim, shoot. The Catholic Church once tried to ban crossbows for use against Christians due to how deadly they were, calling them too inhumane for warfare. The poleaxe was the Swiss army knife of medieval war, a combination of axe, hammer and spear. It could be used to hook riders off horses, smash helmets, or stab through visors. Usually about 5 to 6 feet long, it gave reach, leverage, and sheer destructive power. It was so effective that even knightly tournaments used them, in full armour no less, often resulting in severe injuries or death. Medieval battles weren't just fought man to man, they were fought castle to castle. And the trebuchet was the king of siege weapons. Capable of hurling 90-kilogram stones over 300 metres, it could reduce walls to rubble. Some hurled rotting corpses or diseased animals to spread plague. The largest trebuchets could take weeks to build, but delivered destruction with bone-rattling impact. Don't let the poetic name fool you. The Morning Star was pure pain. A spiked ball attached to a handle or a chain allowed it to strike over shields or around defences. The spikes pierced flesh, shattered bones, and could not be easily parried. Despite myths, the chain version was rare in war due to its unpredictability, but fixed-head Morning Stars were real and horrifying. Some weapons weren't designed to kill, but to capture you alive, and that could be even worse. Meet the Man-Catcher, a rare but terrifying pole weapon used to snare knights and drag them off horses or out of battle. Its pronged, spring-loaded cage clamped around the body, neck, or limbs, trapping victims without piercing them. It was ideal for taking prisoners, especially nobles worth ransoming. Once caught, escape was nearly impossible, especially if multiple soldiers rushed you at once. Though not common on the battlefield, man-catchers were used in riot control, castle arrests, and even papal bodyguard duties. Capture often meant torture, ransom, or public execution. If armour was your shield, the horseman's pick was your curse. A variant of the warhammer, this weapon had a long, narrow spike, capable of piercing plate armour like a can opener. Its short handle made it ideal for mounted combat, delivering crushing force with precision strikes. Unlike swords, the horseman's pick didn't glance off metal. It punctured, often embedding so deep it had to be pried out. Even a glancing blow could cause crippling concussions or internal bleeding. The dagger may seem small, but in medieval combat, size wasn't everything. The rondel dagger, with its narrow, tapered blade, was used to finish off wounded knights, thrust into gaps in armour. In close quarters, daggers were lethal tools of execution. Some knights carried multiple daggers for different uses: combat, utility, or even mercy killing. This was the final weapon when all else failed. Long before modern doctors, medieval villagers turned to herbwives, local women who specialised in healing with plants. These women, often older and highly experienced, gathered and cultivated herbs like yarrow, mugwort, rosemary, and comfrey. They brewed teas, made salves, and applied poultices to treat everything from fevers to infected wounds. Their knowledge was passed down orally, generation to generation, rooted in both folk tradition and practical observation. Some even acted as midwives, guiding childbirth with herbal remedies and whispered prayers. But their role came with risk. In periods of social unrest or religious paranoia, herb wives were among the first accused of witchcraft. Despite this, they were essential figures in rural communities, quiet guardians of health, in a time when hospitals didn't exist for common folk. Think your job stinks? Try being a gong farmer. These workers were hired to empty cesspits and privies, often at night, crawling into toxic spaces, armed only with a shovel and a lantern. Despite the filth, the danger from disease and gas buildup made it one of the best paid jobs among labourers. During the Black Death, plague buriers became a grim necessity. These men were hired to collect and bury the dead, sometimes in mass graves. But the job was short-lived. Many plague buriers fell ill themselves and ended up in the very pits they helped dig. Lime was essential for mortar, plaster and agriculture, and lime burners were the ones who made it. Their job involved superheating limestone in massive kilns, a dangerous process that could lead to burns, lung damage or explosions. Still, their product was in high demand. Before pest control was a profession, medieval towns had rat catchers. These individuals used trained ferrets, dogs or even cats to chase down rats, crucial in a time when plague and disease spread quickly. Some even carried rats as proof of their success and let customers inspect their catch. With no newspapers, town criers served as living media. They shouted out royal decrees, local news, and lost property notices. Paid by the word, town criers had strong lungs and sharp memories. They were also protected by law. Attacking one was a serious offence. Not to be confused with bowyers, fletchers crafted the arrows used by hunters and soldiers alike. A good fletcher's work could mean life or death on the battlefield. Their skills were highly specialised, and they often passed their trade down through generations. Tanners worked with animal hides in disgusting conditions, using vats of dog urine and animal brains to break down the material. The smell was unbearable, and tanneries were usually located on the edges of towns. Still, leather was in constant demand, making this a necessary, if reviled, occupation. Grain was the backbone of medieval diets, and millers controlled its processing. Their apprentices could spend 7 to 10 years learning the trade, eventually inheriting the position or starting their own mill. With control over flour came power, and sometimes suspicion. Millers were often accused of skimming off the top. Toothaches didn't wait for modern medicine. Tooth drawers were travelling showmen who set up in town squares, offering to yank rotten teeth for a few coins. They used pliers, brute force, and little hygiene. It was painful and dangerous, but people were desperate for relief. Long before agricultural science became formalised, medieval peasants understood the need to rest their soil. They practiced a rudimentary form of crop rotation, planting different crops in different fields each year to avoid exhausting nutrients. Typically, this three-field system involved rotating between a grain crop, a legume, like peas or beans, and a fallow field left to recover. This simple method increased yields and helped prevent famine, proving that peasant wisdom often matched, or even exceeded, the era's official science. When food was scarce or just bland, peasants turned to nature for flavour and nutrition. Wild herbs like nettles, sorrel, dandelion greens and purslane were gathered regularly. These plants added vital vitamins and minerals to diets dominated by bread and gruel. Nettles, though stinging when fresh, became a vitamin-rich soup ingredient once cooked. Peasants passed down foraging knowledge orally, teaching which plants healed, which seasoned, and which were poisonous. Without refrigeration, medieval people relied on smoking to preserve their meat and fish. Small smokehouses, often shared between families, would use low, smouldering fires and herbs like rosemary or juniper to flavour and dry the meat. This process could take days, but it kept food edible for weeks or months. Smoked herring, bacon, and salted eels were staple proteins during long winters. Peasants often used Y-shaped dowsing rods to locate underground water. While modern science doesn't support its effectiveness, At the time, this was a trusted method. Many believed the rods reacted to water's energy, guiding the dowser's hands to hidden springs or wells. Whether magic or luck, it helped communities dig wells in the right places more often than not. Medieval resourcefulness meant reusing everything. Hollowed-out gourds became natural water bottles, while pig bladders were cleaned, inflated, and tied off to carry liquids. Though it may sound unappealing today, these vessels were lightweight, waterproof, and, best of all, free. Travellers and shepherds often relied on such makeshift containers during long days away from home. Stinging nettles used as fabric fibre. Though painful to touch, stinging nettles were a valuable resource for medieval peasants. Once harvested and soaked, the tough stems could be broken down into fibres and spun into thread. The result was a coarse but durable fabric that could be woven into sacks, ropes, and even clothing. This clever reuse of an otherwise irritating plant made nettles a surprisingly important survival tool in resource-scarce areas. In peasant households, nothing went to waste. Animal bones were sharpened into needles or awls, hides were tanned for clothing or shoes, and even sinew was dried and used as thread. Bone splinters could insulate walls, and hides could be stretched over window frames. These practices show the deep ingenuity of rural life, where every part of a hunted or slaughtered animal served a purpose. In some villages, peasants crafted dome-shaped clay beehives called skeps to keep bees for honey. Honey wasn't just a rare sweetener, it was used to treat wounds and soothe coughs, while beeswax was essential for making candles in homes without natural light. Keeping bees was a delicate but rewarding process, and hives were often carefully placed near wildflowers or herb gardens to ensure good yields. Keeping bugs off food wasn't easy without modern screens or sprays. Peasants used smoke, smouldering herbs and damp wood to deter insects inside their homes. Hanging garlic near pantries and beds was another common practice, believed to repel not just flies but evil spirits too. These techniques were part of everyday domestic knowledge, passed on primarily by women and rooted in both observation and superstition. To survive long, cold winters, peasants had to prepare well in advance. Root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and onions were stored in deep-root cellars, holes dug into the earth where temperatures stayed cool and stable. Grains were kept in clay pots, sealed with wax or animal fat to keep out moisture and pests. These storage methods were simple but remarkably effective, and could mean the difference between hunger and survival. Instead of wattle and daub, some peasants in areas like Devon and Cornwall used cob, a building material made from clay-rich soil, straw and water. It was durable and insulating. Cob structures, once dried, could last for centuries with regular maintenance. Peasants mixed it with their feet, stomping it for hours to get the right consistency before packing it into wooden moulds or forming walls by hand. Not all peasant homes had straw thatch. In marshy areas, roofs were constructed using reed mats, tightly bound and overlapped to shed water. These mats were surprisingly long-lasting and more fire-resistant than dry straw. Maintenance was still required every few years, especially in damp climates. While dirt floors were common, some villages along coastal regions reinforced their floors with crushed oyster or mussel shells. This created a firmer surface and added calcium, which deterred some pests. In winter, woven mats of dried reeds or wool scraps were placed for comfort and warmth. Instead of strewing herbs solely to cover odours, peasants would burn bundles of dried lavender, thyme or tansy. This smoke masked smells, repelled flies, and was believed to ward off illness. Some even suspended herbs from the rafters to act as natural air purifiers. Many medieval peasants baked their bread directly in the hearth using hot ashes. They would shape coarse loaves from barley or rye flour, then bury them in the embers of the central fire. This method produced dense, smoky-flavoured bread with a hardened crust, sometimes still dusted with ash when served. Though far from today's bakery standards, it was an essential survival technique that didn't require special equipment, and it allowed families to make their own food using the same fire that heated their home. Lime wash remained popular, but some mixed it with cow dung for better adherence and mildew resistance. This created a surprisingly effective protective coating that helped preserve walls from rain and rot while keeping insects at bay. Before chimneys were common, many homes had turf vents built into their roofs. These small, controllable openings allowed some smoke to escape while retaining heat. Others built small sidewall hatches that could be opened during cooking hours to allow limited ventilation. Timber theft from noble lands was common, and whole villages might face punishment if a forest was stripped without permission. Some communities developed secret agreements to rotate wood collection from less patrolled areas. Disputes could lead to fines, floggings, or the confiscation of tools. When a villager needed a new barn or longhouse, others would help build it in exchange for a small feast, a tradition known as a building bee. These events built community trust and were often accompanied by local songs, roasted turnips and shared ale. Peasants used simple tools passed down through generations. Adzes shaped beams, wooden mallets drove stakes, and iron nails were carefully forged by hand. For levelling floors or cutting posts, they used plumb lines, rough chisels, and axes honed with sandstone. In medieval times, personal hygiene wasn't what we'd expect today. Bathing was rare for many commoners, partly due to limited access to clean water and the belief that water could carry disease into the body. Soap was handmade from animal fats and ashes and considered a luxury item. Wealthier households might bathe once a week, but for peasants it was often only a few times a year. Despite popular myths, people did try to stay clean using cloths and herbs, but body odour was a part of daily life. While we might picture fluffy loaves of golden bread, most medieval bread was far from appetising. Wheat was expensive, so commoners baked with rye, barley, or oats. In lean times, bakers even added crushed tree bark or ground beans to stretch their flour. This sometimes caused digestive issues or even poisoning. Nobles, by contrast, enjoyed fine white bread called manchette, baked from pure wheat flour and often served with honey or butter. Salt was more than a seasoning in the Middle Ages. It was wealth. Known as white gold, salt preserved meat and fish, making it crucial for survival, especially in winter. At grand feasts where a person sat in relation to the salt cellar marked their rank. Nobles and honoured guests sat above the salt, closer to the host, while servants and lower status individuals were seated below the salt. Its value was so great that Roman soldiers were once paid in salt, giving us the word salary. Medieval evenings were dark, literally. Most homes didn't have windows, and when the sun went down, people relied on candles or oil lamps for light. But candles weren't the scented luxury we know today. They were often made from tallow, a rendered animal fat, which produced thick smoke and a strong odour. Only churches and the very wealthy used beeswax candles, which burned cleaner and brighter. For many, bedtime came shortly after sundown to save on lighting. While cats and dogs were kept for companionship or pest control, medieval households, especially noble ones, sometimes had more exotic pets. Falcons were prized by the upper class, not only for hunting but also as a symbol of status. Monkeys, squirrels, and even songbirds like nightingales could be found in wealthier homes. These animals were often pampered and even featured in medieval art and literature. Meanwhile, in rural communities, animals like goats and pigs sometimes served dual roles: livestock by day, companions by necessity. The bond between people and their animals, whether practical or affectionate, played a quiet but meaningful role in medieval daily life. A single night's sleep wasn't the norm in the Middle Ages. Historical records suggest that people followed a segmented sleep pattern: first sleep and second sleep. After going to bed at dusk, people would sleep for a few hours, wake around midnight, pray, read or even visit neighbours, and then go back to sleep until dawn. This pattern matched the natural rhythms of candlelit life and limited daylight. It also allowed people quiet time for reflection in the middle of the night. In medieval times, oral hygiene was quite different from today. People often used herbs like parsley, mint and rosemary to freshen their breath after meals. Chewing these fragrant herbs helped mask the strong odours caused by less frequent toothbrushing and the heavy diets of the time. Some even made homemade mouthwashes using vinegar or wine infused with herbs. While they lacked modern dental care, these natural remedies were an important part of daily life to maintain some sense of cleanliness and social etiquette. Medieval people did take some care of their teeth. While toothbrushes didn't exist, people used frayed sticks or cloth to rub their teeth clean and remove debris. Interestingly, skeletal remains from the period show relatively healthy teeth, likely due to a lack of processed sugar. Names in the medieval world carried deep meaning. They often reflected a person's trade, like John Smith, location, Alice of York, or a personal trait, Geoffrey the Bold. Nicknames were widely used, especially when multiple people shared the same first name. A Thomas could become Thomas the Miller, Tom Short, or Tomkin. Some surnames stuck for generations, becoming the last names we still use today. While peasants struggled to get enough food, noble banquets were lavish and long-lasting. Feasts were held to celebrate religious holidays, marriages, and military victories, and they didn't end after one course or one evening. Some lasted several days, featuring dozens of dishes, musicians, jugglers, and entertainers. Moulded jellies were served alongside dramatic centerpieces, like pies filled with live birds. These grand spectacles reinforced the wealth and status of the host. Welcome to the chaos and charm of the Middle Ages. We will explore the myths, monsters, and mysteries from medieval times. These legends shaped real beliefs, inspired crusades, and defined times. While the sword in the stone tale might sound far-fetched, many historians believe the legend was inspired by an actual war leader from the 5th or 6th century. This mysterious figure supposedly led British forces against Saxon invaders, laying the foundation for centuries of Arthurian legends. To medieval minds, dragons weren't just fantasy, they were facts. Bestiaries and maps marked unexplored lands with warnings like "Here be dragons." Caves, mountain ranges, and distant islands were all fair game for dragon sightings. Elves, goblins, and fairies were not the magical helpers we think of today. Back then, they were blamed for stolen children, sudden sickness, or strange happenings in the woods. Folklore was filled with warnings of these dangerous beings. The Holy Grail wasn't just a symbol of divine power, it was the ultimate medieval obsession. Knights of the Round Table, including Sir Galahad and Sir Lancelot, were said to seek this mystical chalice, believed to hold the blood of Christ. The search became a metaphor for purity, sacrifice, and divine favour. Medieval people truly believed in revenants, restless spirits or walking corpses. Ghost stories were not just spooky tales, but moral warnings about unresolved sins, improper burials, or divine punishment. Unicorns, manticores, and even the dreaded basilisk appeared in real medieval texts. Scholars of the time included them in encyclopedias, treating them as exotic animals rather than mythical monsters. These travelling performers kept legends alive, spinning tales of heroism, betrayal, magic, and war. Their stories were entertainment, history, and moral lesson all rolled into one. Merlin wasn't just a magician in stories. Some medieval people believed he had actually existed and possessed prophetic powers. Chronicles and religious texts sometimes referred to him as a sage who foresaw great wars and the rise of kings. The tale of Beowulf slaying Grendel and a fire-breathing dragon is one of the earliest surviving epic poems in English. While clearly legendary, it also reflects the real warrior culture of early medieval Scandinavia and England. A solar eclipse wasn't just a natural event, it was a warning. Medieval people believed celestial signs were divine messages. comets could signal the death of a king. Blood moons foretold war. The sky was, quite literally, the news. The medieval world wasn't just built on stone and steel. It was built on stories. Legends weren't just entertainment. They were how people explained the unexplainable. Which legend do you believe has some truth to it? Contrary to popular myth, most educated people in the Middle Ages knew the earth was round. This idea that everyone thought the earth was flat actually comes from much later misconceptions. Medieval scholars, especially those influenced by ancient Greek and Roman texts, accepted a spherical earth as common knowledge. One of the most enduring myths is that Vikings wore horned helmets. In reality, there's no evidence that these helmets were ever used in battle. The image likely comes from 19th century opera costumes and artistic imagination, rather than archaeological fact. It's often said people in the Middle Ages were filthy and never washed. But public bathhouses were actually common in many medieval towns. People bathed regularly, though the frequency and methods varied by class and region. The myth of dirtiness grew stronger during the later plagues, when bathing was wrongly thought to spread disease. The Iron Maiden is often shown as a gruesome medieval punishment tool, but there's no evidence it was ever actually used. Most examples were created in the 18th or 19th century for museums or shock value, not as real medieval artifacts. This bizarre image has roots in medieval folklore, but it wasn't a widely accepted belief during the Middle Ages. The flying broomstick idea became more prominent during later witch hunts, mixing superstition with fear and imagination. Knights are often portrayed as chivalrous and honourable, but in reality, many were brutal mercenaries or enforcers for powerful lords. While the code of chivalry existed, it was more of an ideal than a rulebook, and many knights ignored it when it suited them. While some monarchs claimed divine authority, the concept of the divine right of kings wasn't universal during the entire Middle Ages. Power often shifted between monarchs, nobles, and even religious leaders. In fact, many kings were challenged, deposed, or even excommunicated. Not all peasants were powerless. While serfdom was widespread, many peasants could own land, pay rent, and even sue lords in local courts. Life was hard, yes, but not entirely without rights or autonomy. It's a myth that medieval women had no voice. Queens like Eleanor of Aquitaine wielded enormous power, and women in some towns ran businesses, owned property, and led religious institutions. Their roles were more complex than most stereotypes suggest. Lastly, the idea of the Dark Ages is itself a myth. While it's true there were challenges, like war, disease, and limited scientific progress, this era also saw advancements in architecture, philosophy, literature, and early science. It laid the groundwork for the Renaissance. The medieval world was a place where justice was often brutal, unfair, and terrifying. From bizarre trials to horrifying executions, the punishments of the time reflected a society that believed suffering could reveal the truth. If someone was accused of a crime, they didn't get a fair trial. Instead, they faced trial by ordeal. This could mean holding a red-hot iron, walking across burning coals, or being thrown into a freezing river. If they survived or healed quickly, it meant God had judged them innocent. If not, their guilt was proven, and they were punished, often by execution. For lesser crimes, people were put in stocks or pillories, wooden frames that locked their heads and hands in place in the town square. There they were pelted with rotten food, mud, and even stones by angry crowds. This punishment wasn't just about suffering, it was meant to shame criminals so they wouldn't repeat their offences. Anyone suspected of witchcraft faced torture, forced confessions, and execution. Many were burned at the stake or hanged. Some trials used the ordeal by water, where the accused was thrown into a river. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank and drowned, they were innocent. Either way, survival was unlikely. Believe it or not, animals could be charged with crimes like destroying crops, attacking people, or even stealing. There are records of pigs being executed, goats being put on trial, and even insects being sentenced for damaging harvests. These trials were taken just as seriously as human cases. While peasants were punished for the smallest crimes, nobles often had private armies and could ignore the king's laws. They settled disputes with bribery, duels, or outright violence. If a noble did commit a crime, they were more likely to be banished or fined rather than executed. Poisoning was a serious fear, especially among the wealthy. To protect themselves, kings and nobles hired food testers, people who took the first bite of a meal to make sure it wasn't poisoned. If the tester survived, the food was considered safe. If not, well, it was time to find a new tester. Instead of going to court, people could fight to prove their innocence. Trial by combat was a legal way to settle accusations. Whoever won was considered right in the eyes of the law. Even minor disputes could be settled with swords, and sometimes the fight was to the death. Stealing wasn't taken lightly in the medieval world. Even petty theft, like stealing a loaf of bread, could lead to a harsh punishment, including hanging. The idea was that harsh penalties would scare people into obedience, but it often meant poor people faced death for minor crimes. Making fake coins was one of the worst crimes a person could commit. Since money was directly tied to the king's power, counterfeiting was seen as an act of treason. The punishment? Being thrown into a cauldron of boiling water or oil. Some trials were based entirely on pain and survival. In ordeal by fire, the accused had to carry a burning hot object. If their wounds healed, they were innocent. In ordeal by water, the accused was tied up and tossed into a river. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank, they were innocent, but often drowned. Grab your sword, strap on your armour, and let's ride into battle. Think castles were just grand stone homes. Think again. Defending a castle was brutal, and one of the sneakiest defences was murder holes. These were gaps in the ceiling where defenders could dump boiling oil, molten lead, or even rocks on invaders trying to storm the gates. If you ever wanted to take a swim in a medieval moat, don't. Most castle toilets, called garderobes, were simple stone seats with holes, leading directly into the moat. Yep, the same water that protected the castle from enemies was also filled with human waste. So if you were a soldier sieging a castle, not only were you dodging arrows, but you were also standing next to a giant medieval toilet. Becoming a knight wasn't just about wearing cool armour and swinging swords. It took a lifetime of training. Boys as young as 7 years old became pages, working under knights and learning basic combat skills. By 14, they became squires, training harder, polishing armour, and assisting in real battles. If they survived all that, they were knighted around age 21. No participation trophies here. If you couldn't keep up, you were out. Ever heard the myth that knights in full armour couldn't move? That's completely false. A full suit of plate armour weighed 80 to 100 pounds, but it was so well designed that knights could run, climb, and even do somersaults in it. Some knights even wrestled and fought on foot in full armour, proving that they weren't just walking tin cans. Jousting wasn't just a sport, it was a death match on horseback. Two knights charged at full speed, aiming their lances to shatter on impact. Even though they used blunt lances, knights often died from broken necks, concussions, or even splinters piercing their eyes. In one famous case, King Henry II of France was killed in a joust when a lance splintered through his eye socket. Talk about a painful way to go. The longbow was one of the deadliest weapons of the Middle Ages. Unlike short bows, these could pierce knight armour from over 200 yards away. At the Battle of Agincourt, 1415, English longbowmen decimated the French knights, proving that you didn't need heavy armour to win battles. You just needed a really, really big bow. Castles were built for defence, but if things got too dangerous, lords had hidden tunnels to escape a siege. These tunnels, called sally ports, led to secret exits beyond the castle walls, allowing defenders to sneak out, surprise the enemy, or even escape unnoticed. So if you ever feel trapped, just remember, medieval lords had a backup plan. Not all knights served kings, some joined mysterious warrior orders. The Knights Templar, Teutonic Knights, and Hospitallers were elite warriors sworn to protect pilgrims and fight in holy wars. Many of these knights became legendary, with some believing they guarded sacred relics like the Holy Grail. Their secrets remain shrouded in mystery, with some even inspiring legends of hidden treasure. Forget soccer or basketball. If you were a noble in medieval times, your favourite sport was hunting with falcons. Falconry was a status symbol, with trained birds hunting rabbits, pheasants, and even small deer. Only the wealthiest nobles could afford rare falcons from the Middle East, making them a prized possession in medieval courts. Think of it as having a luxury sports car, except it's a bird. Dogs and horses were common nightly pets, but some took it to the next level. They kept bears as pets. Knights returning from wars sometimes brought back exotic animals. Some even trained bears for hunting, or had them fight in tournaments for entertainment. Imagine riding into battle with a trained war bear. Now that's medieval madness. Most people in medieval times never travelled more than 10 miles from their birthplace. That's like spending your entire life in your hometown without ever leaving. Roads were dangerous, and most peasants were bound to the land, working for their lords from sunrise to sunset. Think your apartment needs a deep clean? Medieval homes had dirt floors, no glass windows, and were filled with the lovely aroma of smoke, sweat, and, well, livestock. Hygiene? That was a luxury few could afford. Toilets, forget about them. Most people simply had a hole in the ground or used chamber pots, which were dumped, sometimes out the window, onto the streets. Yep, medieval streets were not a place you'd want to take a casual stroll. Forget fancy silverware. Forks weren't commonly used in medieval Europe. People ate with their hands, knives, and sometimes spoons. If you dined with royalty, you might get a napkin. Otherwise, it was all about licking your fingers clean. Believe it or not, women were the primary brewers of beer. Since water was often unsafe to drink, beer was the go-to beverage for all ages. Brewing beer was a household task, just like cooking or baking bread. The medieval work week? 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset. Peasants worked long hours farming, tending livestock, and doing whatever their lord required. Sundays were a day of rest, and a much-needed break. Marriage in the Middle Ages happened early, sometimes as young as 12 for girls. Marriages were often arranged for economic or political reasons, not love. Romance novels had nothing on medieval reality. Think you can wear whatever you want, not in medieval times. Sumptuary laws dictated what colours and fabrics you could wear based on your social class. Peasants, earth tones, nobles, rich, vibrant hues. Medieval fairs were the highlight of the year. Think of them as a mix of a sports event, a music festival, and a wild party. Jousting, drinking, bear baiting, and live entertainment kept the crowds entertained. While peasants lived on bread and porridge, nobles feasted on extravagant dishes, swan, peacock, and even whale. Presentation was everything. Sometimes chefs would reassemble cooked birds with their feathers just for show. Medicine in the Middle Ages was questionable, at best. If you were sick, your chances of survival depended more on luck than actual science. Let's take a look at some of the wildest medical practices and superstitions of medieval times. Feeling sick? Just drain some blood. Bloodletting was one of the most common treatments for everything. Fevers, headaches, infections, you name it. The idea was that illnesses were caused by an imbalance of bodily fluids, so removing blood would rebalance the body. Problem was, it often made people weaker, or even killed them. Believe it or not, medieval doctors tasted urine to diagnose illnesses. They believed the colour, smell, and taste revealed a patient's condition. Imagine walking into a doctor's office today and being handed a cup of pee for a taste test. Yeah, hard pass. The Black Death was the deadliest pandemic in history, wiping out nearly 50% of Europe's population in just a few years. But what caused it? Some believed it was bad air, others blamed angry gods or even witchcraft. People carried flowers or burned herbs to purify the air, none of which helped, of course. These guys, they weren't just creepy, they believed their beaked masks, stuffed with herbs, would protect them from the deadly disease. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Ever had a headache so bad you'd drill a hole in your head? Well, medieval doctors did just that. This practice, called trepanning, was meant to release evil spirits causing mental illness, seizures, or migraines, And somehow, people survived this. Before modern medicine, many treatments were a mix of herbs, magic spells, and crushed gemstones. Yup, some believed powdered gems could cure disease, while others relied on charms and prayers to heal. Let's just say medical school wasn't really a thing back then. Forget modern hospitals. Medieval ones were more like shelters run by monks. They provided food and a place to rest. But actual medical care? Not so much. If you got better, great. If not, well, prayers were your best hope. Believe it or not, people thought that kings had healing powers. It was called the king's touch, and rulers were believed to cure diseases like scrofula just by laying their hands on the sick. Did it work? Probably not. But hey, it gave people hope. Of all the bizarre treatments, leeches are still used today. In medieval times, they were placed on wounds to suck out bad blood and prevent infection. Turns out modern doctors actually use leeches in surgery to improve circulation, one of the few medieval treatments that wasn't complete nonsense. Giving birth in medieval times was dangerous, so midwives relied on prayers, amulets, and herbal remedies to protect mothers and babies. Superstition and medicine often went hand in hand because back then, any bit of luck was needed to survive.